lies, mystery, action. Okay, let's get into it.
No, I am your father.
And here we go.
That belongs in a museum.
Are you telling me that you built a time machine? Out of a DeLorean?
You're gonna need a bigger boat.
This is Sparta!
Remember, with great power comes great responsibility.
Dr. Grant, my dear Dr. Sattler, welcome to Jurassic Park.
Hello and welcome back to another episode of Easily Entertained. What's new? Not really much. We're coming up for me. I have finals week this week as of recording this podcast, so it's gonna be great. I thankfully only have like 2 finals left, which is awesome. I got communication stuff, which is pretty good. You know, it's a vibe. I got to watch some stuff this week just for fun, which we're going to talk about today. I think the first thing we're going to talk about, let's talk about Bullet Train, because Bullet Train came out on Netflix recently. It's been out for a while, but it hasn't been on Netflix, and I have wanted to see it. I just never had the time nor really the money to go see it, so I hadn't really seen Bullet Train yet, but I saw it. Fantastic. Was hilarious, because we got Brad Pitt, we got Aaron Taylor Johnson, we got some other people. There were people I recognized, like the girl I recognize, and the other twin, Lemon, because there's Lemon and Tangerine, which I thought was hilarious. But yeah, it was a pretty solid movie. I'm not gonna lie. I thought the action was pretty on point. I was pretty impressed. Like, and they kept it comedic, but they also were able to keep it a little serious, like not to the point where it was like too much. Like sometimes, like I use like Marvel movies as an example, because I feel like they put serious things sometimes, not serious, comedic things a little bit too much, which I think is a little ridiculous, like even in serious situations. And this one, I feel like it mixed those elements really well. It did have some moments like that, but I liked how they did it, and it kept being funny, and they kept like bringing things back, and I thought that was pretty good. I liked it. Let's see, what is his name? Brian Tyree Henry. That is his name. He plays Lemon. Aaron Taylor Johnson is Tangerine. Joey King, that was the girl who's like kind of evil, and like Sandra Bullock and like Ryan Reynolds are technically in it too, but they're like very minimally in it. Like Sandra Bullock, you usually only hear her voice because she's talking to like Brad Pitt's character, who is there just for like to grab like a briefcase that's full of money, and he's covering for a job that another agent can't make it to, which is Carver, which is Ryan Reynolds' character. So you only see him in like a flashback. There we go. But the movie, it was just so like ridiculous. I liked it. I thought it was pretty good, because like the whole concept is this is all happening on a singular train ride throughout like Japan, I think. But it was pretty funny. I liked it. I don't know, like, I haven't always been a huge fan of Brad Pitt. Granted, I haven't seen him in a lot of things. I always thought maybe he was a tad bit overrated. But I've been seeing like trailers and stuff for things that he's in, like newer things, and I'm like, that looks interesting. I kind of want to watch it. Like, so I saw this and I thought he was fantastic, because I usually think I would assume he's more of like a serious actor. However, in this one, he's very comedic, which I thought was fantastic. I love that. I need to watch, what is it called? Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. I think he's in that one. Someone correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm pretty sure he's in that one. I need to watch that one. And then a new one that's coming out, Babylon, which looks very interesting. I'm not entirely sure what it's about. Like, I have a guess. Like, it seems like something to do with Hollywood, but I can't tell exactly, which is kind of good because I like to go into movies like knowing virtually nothing, because then you kind of go into it and you experience it all for the first time. It's all new, which I think is like the best way to watch a movie, because you get to experience everything. You learn with the characters what's happening. It's pretty great. I like it, and I think that's like the best way to go into movies. And I'll probably talk about like that kind of stuff more in a future episode and go really in depth with it. But yeah, I'm excited for that one. But yeah, Bullet Train was so interesting. I thought action was well choreographed, which isn't always the case, but I felt like this one was pretty good while like still keeping it comedic, because it's like they'd fight and then they'd stop and they'd be like, okay, let's take a break. Give it a second. And they're like, okay. And then they'd keep going. I thought that was hilarious because normally that doesn't happen. They'll be like, okay, stop. No. Bang. And then they just keep on going, which can like work. But I thought it was funny that they would legit be like, stop, and then actually stop. I thought that was very interesting. Yeah, I liked Bullet Train. Another one that I watched it last night. Amsterdam, which has Christian Bale, Margot Robbie, and another guy. I feel so bad. I'm forgetting the black actors' names because I forgot Brian Henry in the last one, and I'm forgetting the actor in this one, which makes me feel bad. I don't intentionally do that. I just don't know their names. John David Washington. Oh, and like Taylor Swift was in it, and Anya Taylor-Joy, and Zoe Saldana. And Rami Malek. I think that's how you pronounce his name. I don't know. But that one was really good too. That one's more of a mystery. And I'd seen trailers for it. I didn't realize it was actually based, like, sort of on a real story. So I was like looking that up afterwards. Because the whole thing is that they're trying to uncover the reason why, like, a high status veteran, I can't remember if he is a veteran or if he supported the veterans. It seems like Bill Meekins in the movie. I don't know the real story, but in the movie, this guy, Bill Meekins, he dies. And so these two guys, Christian Bale's character, and oh my gosh, I forgot his name. Washington something. John Washington. Harold Woodman. Is that his name? Oh, I'm terrible. But so those two characters, they are trying to uncover what is wrong, and they're like best friends, basically. And so they're trying to be like, oh, why did he die? Because his daughter, who was played by Taylor Swift, and she's not in it very long because she dies. Spoiler alert. Sorry. If you're watching or listening to this podcast, you should probably know I'm going to spoil things a lot of the time. So I hope you have already seen these things, or you don't really care about them being spoiled. But so they're trying to figure out why this guy died, and how, because they figured out he was like poisoned. And so they're trying to understand why. And so the whole story, at least what I understand about the realistic story, which was called The Business Plot, which happened in the 1930s, which is when this movie takes place. So they're like pretty comparable, is that there were these businessmen that were trying to essentially overthrow the government and were using ideologies. I think that's the right word. That a lot of German, not I wouldn't say German, because Germans weren't necessarily the problem. Nazis and like Italy were having at the time with like Mussolini, things like that. They were trying to have their leaders be like that and use those kind of strategies. And they wanted to convince veterans to vote for those kinds of people. And so they wanted a general who was a big supporter of veterans. I think he was a retired general, and they wanted him to essentially be like the next dictator, essentially, and overthrow like the Constitution and the government. And I hadn't heard of this story before, so I only looked it up after like watching the movie. But it was very interesting, and it kind of like, I feel like plays a lot into today as well, like the modern world, because we have so many corporations and things that are constantly growing and having a lot of power and a lot of political power, because they control these things. Like if you think about a lot of social media and like Twitter, who Elon Musk owns now, and he's like, we support free speech, and he reinstated Donald Trump, and that's a whole nother thing to talk about. But it's like this kind of stuff, so much power can be put with people that just have a lot of money. I think that's a little scary, and I thought that was good that they were like, okay, history repeats. And that's actually like a big message in the movie, is that history repeats, because the main characters kind of had things where they were like, this will happen again, bad things will happen again, this kind of stuff will happen again, where people die and it's because they're trying to overthrow, and it will happen again. And I felt like it was almost a message for like the current world. They're like, hey, we don't want history to repeat itself, we have to learn from our mistakes, which I thought was a good message. And the movie was fantastically done, because it's like a mystery, and the whole time you're trying to piece together it all. And I didn't really understand what was happening most of the time until I got to the end, and I was like, oh, I see, they're trying to overthrow. Got it. I understand now. But it was interesting. It was very good. All the actors, fantastic. And then Margot Robbie, her character, she becomes like a really main character. I'd say a third of the way in the movie is when she's introduced, and then she's prominent the rest of the movie. But because like Christian Bale's character and John David Washington were in like a regiment together in the army, and so I don't remember their characters' names, but so they were in like the same regiment, and because the black guy's character, I say that, sorry, I know his name, John Washington. I don't know the character's name. I can't remember. It's Harold and Bert. Yes. So Harold, he's a black guy, and the army, like the rest of the army, didn't really want to fight with him, and they had officers that didn't really like them and didn't care about their safety. And so Bert was a doctor, and he wanted everybody to live, and he didn't care who he fought beside, and he wanted to lead these people. And so they had like this like bond kind of thing where they were like, I'll save your life, you save mine. And they did throughout the war. And then Margot Robbie comes in, and she enters that like pact. So they all three of them are like the best friends, and they have their time in Amsterdam after the war, and then they go back and shit hits the fan. But so, yeah, it's very interesting. What was that sound? I don't know. You guys may not have heard that, but there was a weird sound that I could suddenly hear in my headphones, and I was like, what is that? But anyways, Amsterdam was pretty good. I liked it. It's a really good mystery. It's on HBO. Highly recommended. You should check that one out. Yeah, so what have we talked about? We talked about Bullet Train, Amsterdam, and that was the other thing. That was the next one I was going to talk about. I talked about this last time because I said I was going to talk about it, is the new Pinocchio that came out on Netflix. So it's not a Disney version. It is independently done. I'm assuming just funded by Netflix, but it was directed by Guillermo del Toro. He's a really fantastic director. I thought his style was great. He typically tends to do more creepy things, I've noticed, at least recently, because I know he has his Cabinet of Curiosities, which I need to watch because I've seen bits and pieces, but I haven't actually watched it yet, so I need to watch that one. But Pinocchio was stop motion, and it was fantastic. It was a musical, which I actually was not expecting. I don't know why. It just didn't seem like it was gonna be a musical. I feel like stop motions aren't normally musicals. I know we have like Nightmare Before Christmas, but like Coraline and Paranorman, those aren't like that. And Trolls or The Missing Link, those aren't musicals. Which is fine. It didn't matter that it was a musical. I love musicals. That was great. But it was, and I thought they had a better musical of Pinocchio than Disney did, which, by the way, if people are confused why they could make a Pinocchio movie, but they're not Disney, it's because Disney doesn't own the rights to Pinocchio, because Pinocchio is under public domain. That's what it's called. So anyone could make a Pinocchio story. I could make a Pinocchio story. There are tons of different versions. You just can't specifically copy the Disneyfied version, which is okay, because I think the Disney version was all right. Which, speaking of, we had the live action Pinocchio recently, and that I thought was a little, it was a little janky, but yeah. But the Netflix version, the stop motion one, was fantastic. They took a different spin on it. So Geppetto, in this one, he actually had a child, but he lost him because of the war. I'm assuming the First World War in this one. I think. They never specify it, but war is happening, and like you see like Mussolini in this. Kind of ties in with Amsterdam almost, basically. But I think it's like around similar timing frame. But so it's, yeah, Geppetto loses his son, whose name's Carlos, in the war, and he kind of goes mad, essentially. Because rightfully so, he lost his son, and it was due to a bomb, because they were working on a crucifix in a church. Because in this, Geppetto's a woodworker, like he has been in most other adaptations. And so he was going and he was carving a crucifix, and while they were leaving, some planes were flying by and they dropped their bombs, not necessarily because the town was a target, but because they just wanted to let go of their load so that they could fly faster. But because of that, a bomb drops on the church while Carlos is still inside, and he dies. And so Geppetto kind of goes a little crazy. He drinks, he kind of loses it, and then he had grown a pine tree because Carlos had found a pine cone while he was still alive, and they were doing woodworking together, and they were going to grow a new tree. And so when he dies, he buries the pine cone where Carlos is buried. And eventually, after so many years, I think like 10 years or something stupid, 10, 13, I say stupid, but it's stupid because I can't remember. But it's after a while. The tree is like fully grown at this point. But so on one night, he kind of loses it. Geppetto does. And so he chops down the tree, and he's like, you know what? I'm going to make a new son. And so he carves from this tree that Carlos had basically picked and then was grown around his body, he carved Pinocchio out of. And then in the middle of the night, they have like a spirit who comes and brings Pinocchio to life. And Geppetto is like, oh my goodness, this wood puppet that I just built is alive. That's a little crazy. And Pinocchio is a little like, because he doesn't understand how the world works yet, because he's just a boy. He basically has the mind of like 5-year-old, essentially. He can talk like fairly well, but his thought processes are low. He doesn't understand a lot. And so he still has to learn things. So he's like, Geppetto and like the town mayor is like, you have to go to school because things are going to go wrong. And of course, on his way to school, as we all know, he gets sidetracked by a ringmaster for a circus. And he's like, oh, you should perform in my puppet show. This would be fantastic. It's the puppet with no strings. And so he does. And Geppetto gets angry. And the ringmaster was a bit of a sleazebag and kind of signed Pinocchio's life away, essentially. And while fighting over him, Pinocchio gets hit by a truck and he dies. However, because he's magic and made of wood, he can come back to life. However, every time he dies, he has to spend a little bit longer in the afterlife with this like death spirit, essentially. And he has to spend longer and longer each time he dies. And so he shouldn't be dying a lot because it will get to a point where he waits probably like years in the afterlife before he comes back. But when he comes back, people were like, oh, he's immortal. That's kind of cool. And the like mayor essentially is a like, I think a general is what they describe him as for like the Italian military. And so they're like, oh, he could be the perfect soldier. But Pinocchio continues to perform for a while until eventually he's sick of it. He's like, okay, we're done with this. We're not going to do that anymore. And so he gets put into the military because they're like, well, he can't die. Let's make him a soldier. And while Pinocchio was off, like settling a debt, performing for the circus, and then being recruited to the military, Geppetto went out to go and find him. And so, as like pretty much the classic thing happens, he goes out onto a boat and he's like, okay, I have to get across the gulf and go find Pinocchio. But what ends up happening is there's a monster in the water, which I think officially the name is Monstro, I think. They don't say it in this one, I don't think. But in like the Disney version, I think that's what they call him. It's like Monstro. I think he's supposed to be a whale. At least that was the case in the original, like Disney version. But I don't know if they ever specify in any of the newer ones, because I know in the new live action one, it was not a whale. It was like some weird whale kraken thing. I remember seeing it. I mean, like that almost looks like a mosasaurus from like Jurassic World. I don't think that's the same thing. And then in this one, it's like more of like a fish that's really like gross and looks like the sludge of humanity in the ocean and has like tentacles and stuff. But it was interesting. But so he gets swallowed. So Geppetto gets swallowed by this monster. And so Pinocchio is going to find him after they end in the war. And so while they're going, after he leaves the military, because he escapes essentially because the military training site is like bombed. And so he gets out and he goes to try and find Geppetto. And I remember how he gets found. But Pinocchio, of course, he ends up getting swallowed by the same monster. And then he's like, oh, I found him. I know where he is now. He's alive, which is great because they're like, oh, sweet. Now we can get out of here or try and figure out how to get out. And so they build up some smoke, and it's a classic thing. The monster sneezes them out, and then while they're escaping and making it back to shore, Pinocchio dies again. And this time, what happens is, so they're not too sure yet. And so, but Pinocchio dies by like a bomb or something. But he was helping Geppetto. And so Geppetto's starting to drown. And so while he's in the afterlife, he's like, I need to go back. So if you remember, he has to spend longer and longer each time he dies. And he's died a couple times at this point. But so he has to wait a while until he can go back. But he can't because Geppetto's dying. And so the only way he can do it is he has to become mortal. So he has to break like this hourglass because he has to wait till the sands run out, essentially. So he breaks the hourglass, and then he goes back and saves Geppetto, but at the cost of his life. And of course, Geppetto feels like great remorse, and the spirit who originally gave Pinocchio life came out and was like, I'm sorry, but he is dead. But she had promised Jiminy if he would, well, his name's not Jiminy in this, his name's Sebastian. But so he would, if he would watch for Pinocchio and help guide him and make sure he's a little good boy, then she would grant him one wish. And originally his wish was like something like selfish, be like fame, fortune, getting to publish my book, whatever. But so in this why was I going to say in this version? But in this time, he was like, okay, fine. My wish is that Pinocchio can be brought back to life. And so she brings him back to life, and then it's back to like, he kind of can live forever now because he's still a wooden boy. They don't make him into like a real boy. They just make him wooden. And so it kind of has almost this like bittersweet ending because now Pinocchio gets to grow old, and they have like a short little montage at the very end. He grows old, and Geppetto dies, and Sebastian, sorry. And the monkey from the circus who eventually switched sides and helped Pinocchio out also dies. And so Pinocchio's kind of on his own. And so he eventually decides, well, I'm going to venture out into the world. And then it ends right there. And it was kind of this sweet version of Pinocchio. I really liked it a lot more than like the Disney versions. I liked the animation style because stop motion is so cool. It's so interesting to look at because you can see how they had to make everything move. And there was an interview with Del Toro, and he said they even animated like mistakes to make it feel more like real life because people make mistakes. They trip and they fall or they stumble over something. And he was like, we have to put this in to give it as much realism as possible, because sometimes in animation you forget about that. You forget about the little things, but sometimes the little things have a big impact because they make you realize, oh, this is a lived-in world. It's why like they try and animate, like even like Pixar, they try and give things like scars and damage. Like in Toy Story, they want to make things look worn as if they've been played with a lot. And I think that's such an interesting thing to think about with animation, is you have to think about all the little details, because you're like, well, we don't want this to be completely fake. Like obviously people will know it's fake, but you want to give a sense of realism with it. And I thought they did that really well. And then all the music in this was actually fantastic. Even like Pinocchio songs, because it's a little boy, I would assume, who is voicing the character. But he, you know, sometimes kids, they have like more shrill voices, and in turn singing isn't always the greatest. But I thought this one was fantastic. And I thought the music was great. The animation is phenomenal. I even thought the writing was really good. I like the messaging behind it and stuff. I thought it was so good. I loved this version of Pinocchio, and I highly recommend you guys can watch it because it's out on Netflix now. It came out on the 9th. I think that was Friday. Yeah, it was so good. Y'all should watch it. I think you'll really like it. But yeah, so that is pretty much it. We talked about Pinocchio and Amsterdam and Bullet Train. It was kind of a fantastic week for watching some movies. Hopefully I get to see Avatar, The Way of Water this week, and we can talk about that next time. Not sure, because, you know, that one is going to be packed. And so we'll see if I get it this weekend or if we'll have to wait. Maybe it'll be the Christmas episode. But yeah, those are all great. So I hope you guys enjoyed. And I will see all you guys in the next one. Hey, thank you for listening to this episode of Easily Entertained. If you enjoyed, be sure to keep listening. Subscribe. We're available on Spotify, Apple Music, Amazon, and wherever else you get your podcasts. And we also have social media profiles. We got TikTok, Instagram, and Twitter. You should check those out as well, so you can get notified on all things entertainment. And I hope you enjoy, and we'll see you all in the next one.